And today, we are plunging into a truly monumental work, René Girard's Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World. It's a book presented as this profound dialogue, and honestly, it offers a radically new way to look at human culture, religion, psychology, pretty much everything.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack Girard's really revolutionary idea. The idea that human culture, social order, it's all fundamentally built on a mechanism that's so primal, so pervasive, but also so hidden that just recognizing it can unravel centuries of misunderstanding. It can reveal both our greatest dangers and maybe our deepest truths.
Let's jump right in. Okay, so let's kick off with what Girard sees as the engine behind so much human behavior, imitation or what he calls mimesis. Now, we all know people copy each other, right? Kids learn that way. But for Girard, it's way more than just simple mimicry. Can you sort of unpack what he means by this more intense form of mimesis?
Absolutely. So think about basic imitation kids learn, like you said, that's natural. But Girard zooms in on what he calls acquisitive mimesis. This is when you start desiring the same thing someone else desires because they desire it. Two kids wanting the exact same toy, maybe two colleagues after the same promotion. What happens then?
Well, conflict, rivalry. Exactly. Inevitably, it sparks rivalry and conflict. And what's really fascinating here, and this is a key Girard insight, as this rivalry gets more intense, more acute, the rivals often forget about the actual object, the toy, the job, whatever it was. It fades into the background. And instead, they become more fascinated, maybe even obsessed, with each other, with the rival.
Okay. So it's not just about getting the thing anymore. It's about the other person. They become both the model for your desire. I mean, they showed you what to want in the first place for it, but then they instantly become an obstacle to you getting it. This creates what Girard calls a double relationship. People mirroring each other's desires, frustrations, which can just spiral, right, into serious conflict. You see it everywhere. Sibling squabbles, office politics, even like international tensions.
Precisely. And it's from this escalating mimetic crisis, this sort of pervasive conflict that threatens to just tear a community apart, that a really surprising resolution often emerges. This is what Girard calls the victimage mechanism. Or you might know it as the scapegoat mechanism. Basically, at the peak of the chaos, when everyone's at each other's throats, the community spontaneously, almost like an instinct, unifies against a single individual, or maybe a small group. It's this sudden collective convergence of violence onto one target.
Okay, here's where it gets really mind-bending for me. There's this deep paradox, isn't there? The victim, this one person, they're suddenly seen as the cause of both the initial chaos and the miraculous return to peace. It's like 1 minute everything's a mess, next minute after they attack or expel this person, suddenly there's calm. So the community pins both the problem and the solution on the same person. It doesn't seem logical.
It's not logical, but it feels right to the community in that moment. The victim is absolutely held responsible for the renewed calm and for the disorder just before it. Girard even says they're sometimes believed to have somehow brought about their own death. It's bizarre. And this is why the victim often becomes sacred. They embody both the destructive chaos and the life-giving peace. Religion itself, then, in Girard's view, is this immense ongoing effort to keep the peace, even if originally it's through this kind of sacrificial violence. It's a way to channel those destructive mimetic energies outward, onto someone else to restore internal order, even if it's all based on fundamentally misrecognizing the victim's actual innocence. That's Girard's first huge insight. Our peace, our social order, it's often built on a shared act of violence that we then have to forget or disguise.
Right. We build order on a hidden crime, essentially.
You can put it that way. So, societies, having felt that power, that unifying peace from the victimage mechanism, they then try to reproduce it. They create rituals to reenact it, hoping to get the same peaceful result. And they also try to prevent the original chaos from returning through prohibitions, rules, taboos, all designed to maintain that fragile peace they stumbled upon through the scapegoat.
And some of those prohibitions, when you first read about them, they sound completely absurd, right? Things like ancient cultures having a deep fear of twins or even of mirrors. But Girard makes them strangely logical within his system. Can you explain that?
Yeah, they seem bizarre to us now, but he argues they become understandable if you see them through the lens of mimetic conflict. Twins, mirrors. What do they represent? The perfect double, the indistinguishable other, that very thing. The lack of difference is what fuels the most dangerous mimetic rivalry, the kind that dissolves social bonds. So these prohibitions are like a cultural memory, a warning sign. Danger. Avoid the undifferentiated double that almost destroyed us.
Wow. Okay, so it's a deep encoded memory.
Exactly. And this foundational mechanism, the victimage process, it doesn't just explain rituals and weird rules. Girard argues it actually structures human institutions right from their beginnings. It's not just some sociological quirk, it's like the blueprint for culture itself. It shapes how power emerges, how we interact with the natural world, even how we think about death and remembrance.
Okay, let's dig into that. Like sacred kingship, that's a fascinating example. You have this figure, the king, whose power, Girard says, originates partly from his role as a kind of potential or surrogate victim, someone who could have been sacrificed, or maybe symbolically represents that original victim. So he embodies both the violence of the founding event and the peace that came after.
Right. And the really clever, maybe slightly dark, twist is how that develops. The time before the king's potential sacrifice could be stretched out, prolonged indefinitely. And in that interval, the future victim gets the chance to consolidate real, actual power. The underlying logic, maybe unconscious, is if killing this figure once brought peace, then maybe controlling them, keeping them alive but contained, can sustain peace. It's a transformation of the original mechanism into political structure.
That's quite a take on the origins of power.
It is. And another thing that really goes against our usual thinking is Girard's idea about animal domestication. We tend to assume, naturally, that humans domesticated animals first and then started using them for sacrifice. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, seems logical.
But Girard flips it. He argues that, actually, only the reverse order is conceivable. He thinks domestication likely emerged from sacrificial practices.
Yeah.
He points to examples like the Ainu bear ceremony in Japan. They'd capture a bear cub, raise it within the community, treat it almost like a revered child, and then ritually kill it, immolate it as a god, a bringer of fortune. So sacrifice, in this view, wasn't just a religious act. It was also, quote, a means for exploring the world. It brought animals into the human sphere in this very intense, ritualized way that over time could lead to actual domestication.
So sacrifice was like an early form of biological research almost.
In a way, yeah, a very risky ritualized form. And this same foundational process, this interpretation of the victimage mechanism, also helps explain funerary rites. Why do humans universally treat death as more than just biological cessation? Why the elaborate burials, the memorials? Girard suggests it stems from interpreting death through the lens of that original founding murder, the expulsion that brought unity. We project significance onto death because it's tied to this primal experience of collective action and its consequences. So in this light, even ancient temples or fortresses built with victims buried in their foundations, a practice meant to ensure their stability and long life, are essentially, in Girard's words, transfigured tombs. They're monuments built, literally sometimes, on the violence that created social order.
Okay, so that's a general mechanism. But then Girard makes a huge pivot when he looks at the Judeo-Christian scriptures. If you compare typical world mythologies, which, as you said, often kind of disguise or justify that founding murder, making the persecutors look okay, you compare that with the Bible, and Girard sees something radically different happening. What is it that stands out?
Yeah, this is absolutely the crucial turning point in his whole thesis. He argues that the Bible, uniquely among ancient texts and mythologies, progressively demystifies the victimage mechanism. Instead of covering it up or celebrating the sacred violence, it starts to pull back the curtain. It begins to reveal the victim's innocence and the community's collective culpability. It exposes the lie at the heart of the sacred founded on violence.
And there are concrete examples woven through the text, right? It's not just a vague feeling.
Oh, absolutely. He traces it carefully. Think of Cain and Abel. Abel is clearly presented as the first innocent victim. And God himself says, listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. The focus shifts immediately to the victim's unjust suffering, not the killer's justification. Then you look at Joseph and his brothers. The collective nature of the persecution, all the brothers ganging up, is totally visible. And Joseph isn't deified or made monstrous to justify their actions. He's just a human being who is wronged. The book of Exodus goes even further, identifying the chosen people, the Hebrews, as the scapegoat within Egyptian society. They are the oppressed, the unjustly accused outsiders. And then you get to the prophets, especially Isaiah, and the figure of the servant of Yahweh. This figure is described as suffering unjustly, despised, and rejected. Crucially, it's portrayed as a spontaneous historical event, a mob action, not a divinely ordained ritual sacrifice. Remember Isaiah 53. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him. He was despised and rejected by men. This is a completely different way of talking about a victim compared to, say, figures in Greek myth who often somehow deserve their fate. The Bible starts telling the story from the victim's perspective.
It's a progressive unveiling of innocence, then.
Exactly. And building directly on that trajectory, Girard makes his most provocative claim. the one that really shakes things up. He argues that Jesus' death is not a sacrifice demanded by a vengeful God needing appeasement. If you connect this to the bigger picture he's been building, the whole traditional idea of divine violence, of God requiring a blood sacrifice, Girard says that notion has absolutely no place in the core inspiration of the Gospels.
Wow. Okay, that is a massive reinterpretation for centuries of Christian theology. So, if it's not God demanding a sacrifice, what is the meaning of Jesus' death, in Girard's view? What does it actually do or reveal?
What it does, fundamentally, is reveal that God is nonviolent. Full stop. Girard is quite forceful on this. He suggests that the traditional sacrificial reading of the crucifixion, the idea that God needed his son killed to forgive humanity, has actually done immense damage. He says it's done more than anything else to discredit Christianity in the modern world because it makes God seem monstrous. Instead, Girard argues, the Gospels don't enact a sacrifice, they reveal the mechanism. They expose the collective violence inherent in humanity. They show us the scapegoat mechanism in action. But this time, they insist on the victim's complete innocence. They unveil the truth.
And how does Satan fit into this?
Oh, right. For Girard, Satan isn't some cartoon devil with horns. Satan is the mimetic process itself. He's the embodiment of acquisitive desire, rivalry, accusation, and the collective violence that follows. He represents the circular mechanisms of violence that trap humanity in these false, lying social orders built on scapegoating. Satan is the accuser, the principle of scandal, the obstacle that trips us up and turns us against each other.
That also makes sense of Jesus's really harsh words for the Pharisees, especially the bit about building tombs for the prophets. Building tombs, Jesus implies, isn't really about honoring the dead prophets. It's about hiding the fact that their ancestors murdered them. It's about continuing the lie, killing truth-tellers to maintain a system built on that original violence, even while pretending to venerate the victims later on.
Precisely. It's covering up the founding murder. And while the passion story, Jesus' suffering and death, might look a bit like some pagan rituals on the surface, Girard insists it's unique because it relentlessly reveals the victim's absolute innocence and the crowd's, the persecutors' collective blindness and guilt. Remember that line from Paul in 1 Corinthians? None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. They were caught in the mechanism, blind to what they were doing. So, the kingdom of God, which Jesus preaches, is presented in Girard's reading as a radical break from all this. It's a break from reciprocal violence, from eye for an eye. It substitutes love, even love of enemies, for the old systems of prohibitions and rituals designed to merely contain violence.
Like, love your enemies, do good.
Exactly. Luke 6. But love your enemies, and do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Girard insists this isn't just nice pie-in-the-sky idealism. He says it's a completely realistic doctrine. It's the only realistic way, he thinks, to actually break the destructive circularity of mimetic violence that defines closed societies. It's the escape route from the trap.
And he talks about the hour of crisis as moment of extreme urgency, right? Like, when violence is peaking, humanity's on the brink. That's the perfect but also the most dangerous moment for this revelation to break through.
Yes, it's a moment of crisis, but also opportunity. The moment when the old ways are failing most spectacularly is the moment a new way becomes possible, even necessary. Now, let's try and bring this forward into the modern world. We use the term scapegoat all the time now, right? It's common language. But Girard would say the mechanism's blind power to unify groups has actually weakened, precisely because we can now often recognize it. We call it out. That's scapegoating. But this recognition, ironically, doesn't necessarily mean less conflict. It might even lead to more overt conflicts of the doubles, because that misrecognition, that shared blindness that made the old sacred order work, is harder to maintain. It's harder to fool ourselves collectively.
Okay, so if we're getting maybe a bit better at spotting the scapegoat mechanism out there in society and politics, what does this mean for us, personally, here and now, inside our own heads, in our relationships? How does this mimetic stuff play out in individual psychology beyond just big social conflicts?
Yeah, that's where it gets really close to home. Girard suggests that many common psychological issues, even severe disorders like psychosis or hysteria, can be understood, at least partly, as expressions of supercharged, exacerbated mimetic rivalry, especially now as those traditional safety valves like collective ritual are disappearing or losing their power. The psychotic structure, for instance, he describes as being characterized by a structure of doubles, where the fundamental differences between self and other just collapse. Think about someone who feels like another person is stealing their thoughts or mirroring their every move in a terrifying way. Girard says, quote, "The subject cannot see any difference in the other. It is because this difference is lost that the other becomes his double, and he becomes a madman. Enko. It's the mimetic process completely overwhelming the individual's sense of self.
So this kind of reframes traditional psychological labels too, like narcissism or masochism. He's saying these aren't just isolated, inherent drives people have.
Not primarily, no. He sees them more as consequences of mimetic desire going wrong, where the person you're imitating, your model, suddenly becomes your obstacle.
Mm.
So a narcissist isn't just inherently self-obsessed in a vacuum. They're often consumed by mimetic rivalry, measuring themselves against others, desiring what others have, feeling slighted by their models. And someone labeled a masochist isn't necessarily seeking pain for its own sake. They might be trapped in a destructive mimetic loop, where the suffering inflicted by the model obstacle becomes weirdly intertwined with the desire itself. It's like they're drawn back again and again to the source of their frustration and pain because that source is also the source of their desire. The suffering is a byproduct of that entanglement.
That's a complex way to view it.
It is. And this brings us to another key term for Girard, the scandalon. It's the Greek word for a stumbling block, or scandal. For Girard, the scandalon isn't just a passive obstacle. It's the living obstacle. It's the mimetic model who becomes your rival, the very person who trips you up because you were imitating them, desiring what they desired. And in this sense, Satan, as we mentioned, is identified with this principle of scandal. The mimetic process itself constantly sets these stumbling blocks in our path, turning models into rivals. Remember when Jesus says to Peter, after Peter tries to dissuade him from his path, he says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me." The Greek is scandalon aimu. Peter, his friend and follower, had momentarily become a mimetic stumbling block, tempting Jesus towards a more human, less radical path.
Right, and this links directly back to Jesus' teaching, like, judge not, that you be not judged. Right, Matthew 7. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? This isn't just like generic moral advice to be nice. In Girard's view, it's directly targeting that destructive pattern of mimetic judgment, that cycle where we accuse others, expose their specks, while being blind to our own massive log, our own involvement in the same mimetic games.
Exactly. It's a call to break the cycle of reciprocal accusation and demystification by first recognizing our own participation in the mimetic dynamic. It's a radical call for self-awareness.
Okay, so pulling this all together, what does this mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of the world, maybe grappling with information overload? Girard offers this. Well, this breathtakingly consistent theory. It seems to link everything from ancient myths and rituals right through to modern politics and even our own psychological struggles. It really does show us these hidden forces, these mimetic undercurrents that are constantly at play. It's a powerful lens.
It really is. And this deep dive into his work, I think it reveals what Girard saw as an unprecedented and frankly quite precarious moment in human history. Our growing knowledge of the victimage mechanism, our ability to see it now, means we can't really rely anymore on those old false religions or traditional sacrificial ways of keeping the peace. We see through the trick. But this knowledge isn't just academic. It brings with it, for Girard, an absolute unavoidable requirement, an implacable necessity, he calls it, which is the definitive renunciation to violence, all violence, without any caveats, without any second thoughts. He literally calls it the condition sine qua non for the survival of humanity itself.
Wow. So understanding the mechanism makes abandoning violence the only option left.
That's his argument. It's almost as if the terrifying and wondrous history of our time, as he puts it, is the slow, painful unfolding of these truths on a global scale. We're witnessing what he called the death of all cultures, meaning cultures in their traditional sacrificial forms, because the hidden mechanism that secretly sustained them is now being exposed to the light.
But that exposure doesn't automatically lead to peace.
No, unfortunately not. The real challenge today, Girard thought, isn't just the obvious external threats, the terrors of the apocalypse that, fill the news every day. It's something maybe more insidious. He worried about a kind of Kafkaesque rejection of all meaning, a deep-seated cynicism and absurdity combined with our unbelievable massive technical power and what he termed the spiritual surrender of nihilism. We have the power to destroy ourselves many times over, but we seem to be losing the shared meaning, the moral compass, the will to prevent it.
So here's the final thought, the provocative question maybe. Can humanity, now sort of unified by this knowledge of how scapegoating works, but clearly not yet unified by universal love or compassion, can we finally find a new way to organize ourselves, a way that doesn't rely consciously or unconsciously on the violence of the scapegoat? Or Maybe think about the prophet Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. He sees the bones coming together, the structure forming, but there's no life, no breath in them yet. Can we, seeing the structure of our conflicts laid bare by thinkers like Girard, finally call upon that breath, maybe a new form of solidarity, of non-violent relating to truly unify us? This, Girard suggests, is the absolutely crucial choice facing us right now, and it demands nothing less than radical self-awareness and that definitive, difficult renunciation of violence he called for.